Yeah, let us get this thing started. So, good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live. And let me share some few slides. So we get together once a week to talk through how we're getting through the pandemic and try and figure out what's on the other side of the pandemic. The panelists are all listed on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder, the views expressed here are personal and not of any organization or company. Please do post comments on the Zoom and the Q&A and chat windows, sorry. And if possible, complete the survey at the end. We'd appreciate that. And this slide deck that I'm showing you with the links and various comments is also available on Monday Live.org right on the homepage. So if you want any of the links. So today, this is the agenda. We're going to spend 10-15 minutes or so just discussing what's going on. And then we're going to do some discussions around digital transformation. We're going to try a new format today. A few of us are going to speak for a few minutes on what digital transformation is, and then we can all ask questions of that person. And so follow up with any questions and comments that you may have provided on the Zoom chats. And a few slides that the members have contributed. Ken is talking about the September issues, combining, collaborating communities, competencies. There's a lot of C's there, Ken. And education, which is the theme for September. Looking forward to that. Mark has noted that New York City subway stations are have some kiosks offering PPE, which is kind of interesting. I saw a couple of things that caught my eye. IBM is sort of doing a bit of a, I guess, PR sort of campaign about what they're doing in COVID. AI is kind of the only IBM-ish thing. They have a portal to allow people to come in and check in and all that kind of things, but the rest of it is all social distancing and normal stuff that we've seen. So I was a little bit disappointed, didn't see more than that. And if you had a mind to escape to Bali, forget about it, because they won't let you in until next year. Rogers saw a comment about standby mode for buildings. That's interesting. I think that's come up once before. And just the general revolution of the global BAS market. Jim is highlighting sort of a new news about pharma companies looking for special kind of space. So maybe we could talk about that in the first 10 minutes. And John has talked really sort of a bleak slide here, both on the residential apartment rentals and sort of over 50% collapse of leasing in the second quarter, which is not great. And now talking about a couple of things about occupancy and analytics and the bad things about dumb buildings. So those are the slides. As I said, the slides are available now actually on mondaylive.org if you want to see them. And with that, throw it out to people to comment.
I have a question as someone who's not necessarily a building automation professional. What's the difference between a dumb building, a smart building, and an intelligent building? Is there?
Good question.
Good question. That seems to have flummoxed this group. Next question.
And the industry is trying to answer this, right? I mean, you see articles, a number of different people providing different perspectives on what that means. I don't think there is any singular answer to that, unfortunately. I think dumb is pretty easy to classify, where, you know, the buildings are not operated properly. They don't communicate information to anybody so that anybody be aware of that. The systems aren't integrated and sharing data. Those are all great characteristics of dumb. When you get into intelligent, it really depends on the viewpoint of what people want to do with their space. I see more and more discussion about, workspace management as being part of an intelligent building, the whole hoteling concept, and now, the impact of that with COVID reserving spaces, but there isn't a singular definition of that.
Thank you.
So maybe you can ask the same question about people. What's the difference between dumb and smart and intelligent people? And that's probably not somewhere we want to go to.
That's good.
So, Jim Butler, do you want to expand on what on what's happening in Cambridge there with the pharma company?
Yeah, so Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I am at the moment, has a lot of pharma companies present. Most of it's R&D, but there's small-scale manufacturing, and real estate development around here is dominated by biotech companies' needs. There are a couple of large REITs that are present here, including Alexandria. And of course, there are lots of companies that think they have space that could be repurposed into pharma space, but it's actually not that easy to do. So most of the projects that we see around town are either completely new construction or very, very substantial renovations. As you might imagine, pharmaceutical research and manufacturing have special needs when it comes to HVAC systems, including in some cases clean rooms. So those spaces are going for top dollar right now in the Boston area. So that's one area of the real estate business that seems to be growing, at least around here, and probably in other parts of the United States and perhaps in Europe as well.
Oh,
Interesting.
One thing I always think is interesting about pharma is that they're process-driven companies, and they seem to get the whole concept of smart buildings and continuous iterations, continuous improvement that you get through data. They seem to get the whole thing a little bit more quickly. So you're right. Pharma is probably a very hot area right now.
Well,
So it's a bit
they've had heavy requirements on data collection, data storage, data validity, and tracking data through its life cycle for decades. I remember dealing with this in the
yeah,
90s.
most of them have always asked for CFR 21, which is like a methodology of collecting data from a BAS to be stored.
But the fact that it looks like they're almost sort of asking for mixed use was sort of interesting, because that goes to a lot of the discussions that we've had, sort of repurposing and different uses.
It's hard to imagine here, having been on, and you live near there, Anto, but living near Genentech, it's hard to imagine that all those buildings also being housing. Is that what Jim is saying?
Well, those buildings in South San Francisco would be difficult to imagine, you're right, but I think that's what Jim is saying is happening in Boston.
Yeah, this is a greenfield development, Therese. Well, essentially greenfield. So the residential that's going in there is completely new construction.
Wow.
Yeah, so you're right. Repurposing is not easy. And if you have pharma space right now, you're not going to be downgrading it to residential.
No.
So John, do you want to talk about the sort of the downward spiral of rent and rent collection and leases?
Yeah, sorry to be the downer here. I track that stuff to try to get a feel for what's going to happen to all of our businesses going forward, right? I prefer to see good news, and in fact, I'm supposed to get a interview with a senior gentleman at a major real estate investment trust. Hopefully next week, he won't come on air, but I'm supposed to get some pretty honest, candid comments from him. And the first comment I got is he's overwhelmingly busy. And, you know, that sounds like crisis mode type of stuff, but I'll be talking to him. But, you know, I mean, we all make technologies that can help buildings, are required in buildings, but we're all dependent on buildings, right? And things like, you know, leases not being renewed or not being sold, those are going to affect us whether we believe we can make the building better or not. You know, one of the market segments we serve is higher education, right? They're being dramatically hurt in how they're going to operate, in the revenue that's coming in, and that is going to affect their budgets in different ways. And we are seeing some, you know, examples of that already. So that's why I try to track those things. And I'll leave it to others to track the other side of it. I'm going to leave my background up until the sun comes out. How's that?
Okay. Great. Ken, do you want to just briefly talk about your CCCC?
Yes, okay. So we're actually seeing that there's a lot of communities combining, and I think that's a common trend, is kind of looking for other competencies that we need and basically incorporating or partnering with these people. The other one that I've just pushed out is this education, and it's the whole concept that we talked about moving all of our control to the edge, and that was a couple of years ago. And ironically enough, here we are 2 years later, and we've moved to the edge as well. And so we now have to kind of look at this whole education thing quite differently, because it's going to, the idea of going to central conferences to get educated is probably not as common as it was. We see some of the events struggling right now, trying to determine whether they're going to go ahead or not. So more and more the online education becomes the way of doing things. Some work that Cochrane Supply is doing is interesting. What they've done is they've kind of taken what I always call the in-between, and basically what they've done is they've set out some sort of mini conferences in local towns where they have their distributorships. And the idea there is that people can drive to a location. They can all meet. They are somewhat in a trusted community because they probably know each other. They're in the same industry. They're in the same town. They don't have to fly. They don't have to stay in hotels. And they can come and they can have a social interaction. And as a big part of those is the virtual training. And we're starting to see that more and more. And kudos to Realcomm, who's forging ahead in difficult times to try and make this happen as a demonstration to us all. And I love their approach that they have basically taken a two-pronged approach, and they basically have both a virtual and a face-to-face side. It'll be very interesting to see what the numbers are that come out of that, how many people actually go to the event, and also how many people attend virtually. So I think those are some big trends that we can kind of try and get our heads around.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let us go to the main part of this show. And what we are going to be doing, let me just show one slide here, is really going to be asking and talking about digital transformation. And the way we decided to do this is to have each of the members in turn talk about digital transformation. And I put up these 3 slides when they first came across digital transformation, experiences, and also how COVID is going to impact digital transformation. And we're going to do this on a sort of time basis. So there are 4 people that's going to do this today. First is going to be Mark Peacock, and he will have 5 minutes to talk about, to answer these questions and talk about digital transformation. And then we'll have another 5 minutes where we can all ask Mark questions or critique or comments. And obviously we would welcome any comments or questions from the audience as well. So with that, I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to start a timer and hand it over to Mark, and I'm the timekeeper, so I have my little cards here.
High tech, Anto, very high tech.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
go ahead, Mark.
so to approach it the way we discussed, as far as when was the first time, or how did I get involved? When was the first time I got involved with digital transformation? You know, it took a little bit of thought, but then remembered it was back in the early 2000s when I was on, prior to my time at Tritium, I was working with a technology consulting group, and IBM was our client. And that's back in the early 2000s, IBM started talking about digital transformation. But my first encounter with digital transformation within the built environment occurred roughly in around the early part of 2014. And from that, the experience was developing a new strategic direction for us at Linkspring. And it was all about the edge and data and connectivity and IP. All of that was converging together. And so hence that was really the first foray into it. And with respect to COVID, I believe COVID is accelerating digital transformation. It's changed the way we're thinking about buildings, as we all can agree, but it's brought a sharp focus to the need to harness and leverage our buildings' digital infrastructure and real-time information. Both are key building blocks for a true digital transformation. In addition, it's driven the increased control and visibility to make buildings safer, have reduced risk, prevent the spread of the virus, and something we've talked about in past times talking, create that trust factor. So addressing COVID-19 is now an emerging part of digital transformation. Most owners and operators are in the early stages of their COVID-19 journey, which we all know includes physical distancing, mask, and the use of hand sanitizers, the visible part. However, COVID-19 digital transformation journey includes these hygiene practices. However, they are closely monitored via digital means with access to live immediate data. The journey also requires the underlying functions and interoperability of the environmental systems and their part in safeguarding employees' health and things such as air quality, airflow, occupant density, temp, pressure, and the generation of actual cleaning reports and no-touch solutions such as objects like doors, paper, towel, dispensers, and so forth and so on. And I want to just sum it up. Anto, if you can get to that slide for me, please, I'd appreciate it. Is what I've put together is a look at COVID-19 digital transformation. What's involved? You start with the strategy. Then you've got to take into account the procedural things, such as the use of PPE, physical distancing, access control, management, occupant tracking. Then one step further is the cleaning and disinfection side of this. Then we go up further into the pyramid, the mechanical side, including air distribution, filtration, humidity, air pressure, as I mentioned earlier. And then, which I think these last two in this pyramid is the identification, to collect, exchange, and analyze that data. And then look at the measurement and the metrics that are truly important, and then continually look at those for continued improvements. So that's how I kind of see COVID-19 is truly accelerating digital transformation from what we used to know it as. So that, I'll turn it over to the next. Did I come in on time, Anto?
You came in on time. You can do a sing and do a little dance if you want.
A song and dance. You don't want to hear me that.
So let's turn it to the rest of the group to pose some questions and some clarifications. Anyone want to start?
I can ask Mark a question, but with your pyramid, Mark, obviously up the top there is measurement and analyzing and things like this. Who do you think's going to be doing that? Because it's still not probably going to be the owner or anyone else. Who's going to be offering those services? Is it going to be combined with facility management software, or what's going to be up there?
I think it's going to be a combination. I think it will be the building, someone within the building owner operations is going to be responsible for that. Because I see going forward, there will be a person or a department who is in charge of COVID things within a building. But then also, you know, it goes to services. Can our integrator channel offer those measurement and things like that? Is it as a service? Is it a whole new business? Just like we're starting to see new businesses grow from this whole thing. That PPE kiosk I mentioned earlier is a prime example. And we've talked previously, I think on maybe one of our Wednesday ones, of a chief medical officer now for a business. And that person is not a full-time staff person, but it's more of a as a service type person. So bottom line is, I think it's a combination of everybody who's involved with managing that building.
Okay.
It'll be interesting, Mark, to see where that responsibility comes under in the facility side, right? Does it come under sustainability, the CFO, CEO, you know, where in the organization that role ends up?
I think it'll be part of the C-suite discussion. And to your point, I think it could be all of those, but then also HR. I think let's not forget HR on this side of it as well, because at the end of the day is we all know that employees or occupants are looking for that trusted environment, that safety and things like that. And then if there are any incidents where folks are diagnosed with the virus, then that's going to be a whole HR issue.
So a question that I have is really on the word transformation. And I'm looking for what you see in that whole process as being the transforming thing. The sort of, are you saying COVID is forcing that transformation or enabling that transformation?
Yes, I'm saying that, and it's being transformed through the things that this industry has been utilizing for the last several years, such as connectivity, such as data, such as analytics. It gives a whole new meaning, a whole new area that we never thought about as a group, as an industry. And even though we have been talking about the occupant experience, the healthy environment and all that, you know, for the last 5-6 years, this is just pushing it faster than anybody I think ever expected.
So Mark, as you know, because we worked on this a few years ago, digital transformation can be defined as taking a manual process and using computing technology to automate aspects of it. So the cleaning portion that you referred to is essentially a manual process today. And so I'm not aware of, I mean, what do you see as the transformation needs to take place to turn that into a data source so that it can be combined with all the other things that you show on the list? Because the HVAC, obviously, we can grab the data off of that, but the cleaning part I see as a existing challenge there.
Well, I think the use of sensors and some of the other technologies or solutions we've seen from some of the folks that have been on Monday Live gives us that insight into what we're seeing. And it's recorded. In other words, sensing that someone goes into a restroom and you make an assumption if the person in charge of cleaning that restroom is actually cleaning that restroom. You know, a date, a time, when they were in there, and things like that. So I think the increased use of sensors is going to be immensely used throughout this whole COVID digital transformation.
Okay.
So Jeff has asked a really good question here in terms of how do you see digital transformation impact the small to medium sized mechanical contractors and controls contractors?
As I see it, I think they're going to be definitely involved because, again, I think they're going to have to address this whole issue of COVID with their particular customers and clients as well. Maybe it may not be on the scope of a huge building or whatnot, but especially in the mechanical systems. And I think, again, the cleaning, the disinfection, and that type of thing, I see them, there's no difference between what they might be doing versus a larger contractor as well.
So, John,
Move on.
yeah, just quickly, last question. So on the HVAC side, John, the Haystack has, defined a lot of, representations of data. Is there a need within Haystack to define some things that would be specific to this around the cleanliness of the air or the filtration, or are there models already in place for that?
If you're talking about the air side, the air and other fluids, I mean, all of the metrics and units for parts per million, parts per billion, all of those things are there so that the sensors that are likely to be used can have metadata available to them. As far as the manual side, I don't think anybody's attempted to, try to build out, tagging models for those things. But, for anything that's going to be sensed, every possible phenomena that you can sense is, and metric for the phenomena is available already as part of the tagging models.
So even things like UV and bipolar ionization and
I'd have to check on that of what the that's a technology, but what it's sensing and measuring is, I believe, a scientific phenomena, and the list of scientific phenomena are pretty extensive, but that's those would be a good thing to check, I think it all comes down in the end after those devices have worked, you're down to parts per million or parts per billion of things you're sensing.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, move on to our next presenter. John, off you go, 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, so when did I have my first date? Well, until I remember it well. It was back in 1982. And back in 1982, we were applying digital microprocessors to replace pneumatics. Digital transformation. And it took a long, long, long time, okay? It took really, I'd say, a decade before it took hold. Some of the people on this call were there, as I remember, back at Andover Control. So that was really the first, right? And it was in a couple of ways. One, it answers the question about technology, but for me as a person, an engineer coming out of engineering school, right, I've been, industrial manufacturing, lathes and mills and casting and stuff, and now, hey, there's this chip and there's two wires coming out and there's a keyboard over there. And I didn't go to school for this, right? So that's the first. And we've been on that path ever since, and it's continued to move through all of the generations of, and remember, in fact, they were called direct digital control systems. They weren't BAS, BMS, intelligent building. Direct digital control systems, that's what they did. A digital chip directly controlled it. So that was the start. And we've watched the evolution, since then, right? 40 years. And, what's happened is the digital portion has taken over more and more, right? The data now. Maybe the new D that we should focus on instead of digital is the data. So, that's what I'd say is the beginning from my point of view. The experiences have been that there's always a new challenge out there, right? We started from control, and then it was networking, right? The original control systems weren't networked. They were one big box with bundles of wires. So then we went to networking, and then the user interface went from a green screen to DOS and graphics and Windows and the web and all of that. So that's all been the transition. More recently, of course, and around the topic of COVID, the impacts that I'm seeing are really related to, I'm going to use a different word. I'm going to say virtual transformation, right? We in our company are doing things differently. We had to reformat all our training to be able to accomplish the end goal of proper training, doing it virtually. Did we have some online stuff before there, yeah, but it was always an ad, an alternative. It wasn't like the complete focus. So that was one of the major things that we had to do. And, you know, to do it effectively, you know, it's a continuous effort. We're all evaluating these new platforms. We're on Zoom today, but there's other platforms out there to support these type of events. The next thing in our, you know, on our schedule is moving what had been a very dynamic in-person community event for our users at our company to virtual, because we don't believe that there's a viable alternative for this fall that can bring together enough of our community to share the information they need to. That's different from saying, can there be a conference that's successful? We needed to get our worldwide community together. We didn't feel we could do it physically. So we're in the process of, you know, moving that to virtual. You know, so that's kind of some perspective I'd give on your questions. One more thing, 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller. The man of the year was the computer, believe it or not.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John. Questions, comments?
So
John,
let me just throw one at you with the DDC thing. Obviously, as you said, it kind of moved from that kind of centralized control where everything reported into it on site, and then networks got flatter and intelligence moved out. And everything used to be covered by the fact that people always were concerned you might lose communication with this controller. People seem to have got less concerned with that sort of thing of, you know, not being able to communicate. And now we're even stretching it more to the cloud. I mean, with what you do and stuff, do you still get that question of, you know, well, what happens when the network goes down, or, you know, we lose connectivity? Is that still something that people raise?
I think it is. It's important. It's you know, it's influenced our design thought. Networks are not 100% reliable, and you know, we don't. You know, I personally don't believe that you can have complete dependence on the cloud. The cloud is part of a computing and data architecture that has to extend from the edge to the cloud. We've talked about the edge in some of our conversations here. And as I, you know, read the tech news, is more and more conversation about the edge, because there are things that have to be done at the edge that can't take the risk of losing communications, have to, or for latency reasons or whatever. But yeah, I remember the early days of that. It was, you know, the networks were pretty flaky and the communications were poor. And I'll relate one quick story and then I'll try to stop here, Otto. When I went to work for a major networking company, one of the things that I found is they all looked upon us poor people from the buildings industry as you know, a bunch of Neanderthals, because we worked with all these primitive networks. And I finally got tired of it one day and I lectured them and I said, look, we were connecting computers with coat hanger before you were born. Yeah, we had to figure out our own networks and they sucked. Sorry, IP wasn't around, you know. So.
I'd like to echo in on that one, because you guys are all starting in the 80s and I started in 1975 with one of the first DDC systems, and it was using like DEC, you know, biggest fridge stuff. And the whole networking side of it, the whole, that was always a challenge. And then as we evolved through up into the 80s, and found people like John, we started seeing more and more of the power put into the DDC. So even then the trend was to get away from depending on the network. And certainly from a control point of view, it's not a good idea to have the control variable in one place and you have to network it to the controller. They always should be physically located, connected to each other.
But there's a bit of a push, Ken, from people like Google to, because it's in their interest, to shift everything up to the cloud and bring it all down. I mean, I don't think many people here actually believe that, you know, you should be pushing it all up. There's a lot more edge type stuff, but there is a push from the IT guys to get as much as they can directly up and then send it back down again.
There's definitely some stuff that has to be on the ground from a control point of view. I mean, if you're controlling a chiller and you don't want to do chilled water remotely.
I'm wondering,
remotely.
John, was the sort of the challenge of the communication between the sensors and actuators to DDC, right? There was kind of there's a communication there. Is that sort of similar to the concerns people are having between edge and cloud? Because those are kind of two very different levels of communications, but they're all talk about communications.
Yeah, I think they're pretty different. I mean, the sensors, originally they connected over, non-digital means, right? 0 to 20 milliamp, 4 to 20 milliamps, 0 to 10 volts, things like that, right? And, if you could get the wire there and it wasn't too long, you didn't have too much voltage drop, you got the signal. It's really when the digital communications came out and it was new to everybody. And it took years for the industry to, create reliable technologies, as it did in the computer industry, right? How many networks came along, right? There was Token Ring, there was ArcNet. Finally, Ethernet took over with IP protocol, but there were many years of the different ones competing as the different applications tested them for different performance requirements.
In the early days, our defense was standalone panels. Basically, everything all control had to function from a standalone panel that if you cut the network, it basically still controlled the process that it was involved with. And so we built on that, and then connecting them was a bonus kind of thing. But that left us in a situation that a lot of our early systems are very, very poor at pushing data back and forth because they were never designed that way. And by the way, still a lot of those systems are still operating out there. I don't know. The big problem with DDC is it lasted forever. We're still using the same 20, 30-year-old systems. Hence, my house is running in a 35-year-old panel.
So our last question for John.
I was just going to pipe in about the whole thing about the Skyposium moving to virtual, about how innovation happens in this industry. Live events have been very important for people to meet and talk. Sometimes we say, it's because we're not over the chasm yet. We're still this group of innovators that needs to just check in with each other and say, how are you answering this question or this question, and trying to replace that that part of our innovation cycle, that physical part. It's a pain point, and I think we're all thinking about how, certainly at Tritium too, not having the Niagara Summit because of COVID has been a pain point, and then trying to move all that digitally is a challenge, but it's a challenge. It's not separate with Ken and his education. He's always making up words. That it's part of our innovation cycle in this industry for so long.
It's an interesting parallel, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, the edge, I think the edge is the solution. The joke on that article, if you click way down, is that our industry is always either moving towards or away from centralization. And when I came into the industry 35 years ago, that was what somebody told me. He's the old sage of the industry in those days, and he's absolutely right. And so this is exactly the same thing. It's just all of a sudden from centralized control of training, we're now moving to remote. And so we have to think like edge controllers.
All right, so we need to move on to Steve, otherwise we're going to run out. Steve, you have 5 minutes starting from now.
All right. So my most recent experience prior to getting involved with Totem Buildings, I was, as I think you guys know, I was running an IT as a services company here in Richmond. And in 2017, we hosted a seminar on digital transformation. And it was really from the IT perspective. And some of our speakers were from Capital One. We had a large hospital out of the DC area, and also a professor from VCU. And it was really focused on this idea that using compute technology to automate processes that are largely manual in nature. And as the company we ran, we had a private cloud. So that's an example of using technology to eliminate the need to purchase, install, and maintain physical compute hardware. It was interesting, the hospital that presented talked about an online patient registration system. Because up until that point, any patient wanting to go into the hospital had to go and sit at a desk and meet with another person one-on-one and fill out all the information, and that was the only option. So that was an example of taking a manual process and making it possible to do it online. So what I wanted to really shift to is my current experience, and it's really the company we're running now here at Totem Buildings. And our goal is to have a cybersecurity risk management software platform for the entire building controls industry. That's what we're doing. The challenge, it's all digital transformation. So it's a process, and it's today that process is largely done manually. When I first got involved with this a couple of years ago, and I talked to customers who were trying to do some level of risk management, what were they using for tools? Spreadsheets, Word documents, survey tools, off-the-shelf survey tools, and off-the-shelf project management software. There was nothing in conventional email. There was nothing that was really looking at how to manage this process from a broad perspective. And then the second problem in our industry is, as you guys know, we're highly fragmented. Everything's siloed. You know, the building automation is one piece, then you got your fire and life safety, your video surveillance, your access control, and so on. And there's no industry standards for the OT industry. A lot in the IT, but nothing in the OT. So our fundamental challenge that we have tried to do to transform this environment is to have some way to communicate and enforce security policies across all the different kinds of control systems and all of the contractors who support those control systems. In other words, solve the vendor fragmentation problem. And what we've done is created a single tool solution that models this entire process from assessment through mediation, through ongoing management, and do it in such a way that only the data that each person in the ecosystem needs to know. So, you know, a customer can have lots of buildings with lots of different contractors and lots of different control systems, but on the backside, all those individual contractors only get to see the data that's relevant to the thing that they're responsible for. And so, you know, and the COVID thing, like a number of you have also said, has added this element of online training, and that's actually a plus for us, because now we've made that just a standard feature. So when they're deploying our products, the training is just an element that's baked right into the design of the product. Questions?
Thanks.
Steve, you talk about the desire to break through the silos of the industry so that you could have a common management platform. I'm sure that many of us here have had experience with the manufacturers intentionally fortifying their silos, and I'm wondering if you could provide any insights into how, as an industry, we can try to break down the silos, but yet allow companies to continue to add value to their products that is unique.
So the first thing for us is trying to get a common set of policies that can be enforced. And fortunately, that doesn't require a high level of real-time data integration. So you can apply one set of policies to essentially any kind of control system. So that's really helpful. The next stage when you're trying to manage is all about, so how do I bring in real-time data into that same environment? And this gets into which I think, Jim, you're referring to, is how do I do that? You know, we're going through publishing our API, but as you know, that's a journey to get everybody to communicate to it. So I think anything we can do to continue to foster open APIs and standards around that is only going to help all of our businesses. And, you know, Teresa's on the phone, you know, and Niagara has tried to solve the problem for many industries, but it's become a sort of a de facto open standard, but arguably, other than BACnet, which is not necessarily what's needed across all these different platforms, we don't have a cross-industry standard that everybody can adopt. So it's a problem.
So I have a question, maybe both John and Steve, you both mentioned virtual training, or Ken did too, sorry, mentioned virtual training. And I think that's something we all have grasped and we all support in our respective companies. Assuming COVID comes to an end or we get control of it, we get some sanity back into the way we operate our businesses and stuff. Do you see that becoming completely the way you will do training? Or will you go back to a combination of, let's call it, on-site training and virtual, or just go back to completely on-site?
It'll remain a hybrid for us of both. There'll still be, we'll definitely go back to including, on-site person, in-person training. Yeah.
Mark, I at this point, we're not large enough, big enough to answer that well. So we're certainly going to emphasize the online as much as possible. I think one of the things I've really come to appreciate is the tools that are available and the ease with which you can create short video content is compelling. So I think when you commit yourself to that direction, and you have resources in place so that as every time you add a new feature, there's a corresponding piece of video that's just a click away for the user. That's really highly attractive for everybody in the value chain, as opposed to trying to have them sit in one place for hours or days at a time and then forget 90% of it 2 days later.
I think the success of your product and services is just completely dependent on your online education. They will become one and the same. Basically, if you cannot educate your client easily on your product, you will not be successful. If you can do a good job of that, you'll be very successful. That's my shot.
Any other questions for Steve?
One more, yeah, I do. So Steve, with previous, when you were at the IT side of the house, do you see a major difference between when you were doing digital transformation and talking about it on the IT side versus the OT side now? And if yes, an example or two to share with the group?
Yeah, I would say that the big fundamental difference is on the IT side, they're looking at business processes. That's the whole focus. An example was, in fact, that hospital I was giving you as a case, a use case. We're looking at how we implement controls and then how we take advantage of the data. So there's digital transformation opportunities in terms of how the contractors use our products. There's digital transformation and how easy it is to implement a particular product or solution by making further investments in automation tools and AI and machine learning and all that, those cool concepts. So yeah, I think our focus is really control, and will continue to be control, broadening it to include all the players, okay, and what they go through. But the big thing on the IT side, they just have no mentality whatsoever for control systems. Everything's a business process. It's all back office and front office business processes that they look at.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Rolling on to the next one. Bill, you have 5 minutes starting from now.
Outstanding. Thank you. So my first date, 1981, I was working for perhaps the largest government contractor on Area 51 out in Nevada. And we were taking Soviet surface-to-air missiles that were won in the Six-Day War and taken from the Israelis, from the Egyptians by the Israelis, and we were digitizing those systems. So that was, gosh, that's 40 years ago. We were digitizing Soviet surface-to-air missiles on Area 51. So thank you for this time. I'm here with a group of my esteemed colleagues who are certainly building automation focused. I mean, paragons of building automation information. My name's Bill Bain. I'm obviously, I'm with Tossibox. We are not focused on building automation, but certainly our technology enables that which all of you are trying to do. And this is a conversation that we're having today. So building automation, there's good news and bad news. When I compare building automation to the other verticals, what water and wastewater, process automation, traffic automation, you guys, there's a couple similarities. Mostly the big similarities are each vertical is being, I wouldn't say held back, but each vertical is dominated by 2 or 3 main manufacturers that, just due to sheer size of those organizations and complexity, innovation is slower. But what's interesting in all of those verticals that we notice is there's also a handful of upstarts nipping at the heel and doing real work. It doesn't matter what vertical, it's the same. Really impacting and driving change inside your industry and other industries. You know, if you think about it, inside of a building is the same as inside of a factory, is the same as inside one of those silver boxes. There's 500,000 of them at each traffic intersection. It's kind of all the same. So I find it interesting that these industries are so similar in how innovation occurs and all of that. The other thing I'd like to say to all of you on this call is, you know, pat yourselves on the back, just like John referred to earlier. Building automation connected a long time ago, long before these other verticals. Now, you adopted early, but you also adopted every horrible practice, but certainly you did it early. And you guys, which is why for a company like ours, it was so easy to enter. You guys are ripe for innovation. You're ready to take on new technologies and so forth. So for me, what does digitization mean? I'll just give you my sort of viewpoint from an outsider. To me, for you guys, what it means is innovation. Digitization spurs innovation. Digitization leads to standardization. There's no question about it. And you guys need that. Digitization, and that standardization, by the way, will enable a more competitive landscape. In your industry, digitization is definitely going to mitigate your labor force risks, as I see it. That drive to digitization is going to allow you to attract A players, maybe start to actually poach some A players from these other industries that are already ripe with A players. Digitization is definitely going to it's going to allow you to bring diversity. I can see already where digitization is allowing you to bring female executives into this industry. I've got examples of that. So I just feel like when we digitize the barriers, I've got 1 minute left on it. I'm going to get there, man. So for you guys and your businesses, I think it's the great equalizer. I think digitization is the great equalizer that's going to allow organizations to move up and down the value chain. Jeff Posey, you asked a question about what's digitization going to mean to a small system integrator contractor. Frankly, it's going to allow them to stay relevant. It's going to let them stay in business, in my opinion. It's going to enable new revenue streams for them. And for the big boys, it's going to be able to tell a bigger story, drive optimization. And as someone on this screen once told me, digitization is going to allow people on this call, if you get it right, to actually show building owners what their buildings can do that the building owner had no idea that building could actually do. And then lastly, I'll finish up. For the individual, for me, digitization, I mean, think about it. It's going to allow somebody in Montana to go work for one of you guys in one of these major cities without having to leave their hometown. It's going to fast track people to a living wage. I think digitization in your industry is going to keep people interested. It's going to keep them around. And it's going to allow them to expand their skills in a relevant way without having to jump ship. So for me, how this whole thing in COVID is working, I mean, we're seeing without question an acceleration. Hard stop, mic drop. Our sales as a company that's enabling digitization, we're seeing not a slowdown, we're seeing a ramp up from our perspective. So that's what digitization means to me. If you have questions about Area 51, I've got to speak to my attorney first before I can answer most of them. That's it.
I wanted to know what was in the bunkers.
That's great, great call to action, Bill. Thank you. Any comments?
Bill, you know, your model and your application and Tossibox, I know you use it in the BAS, but I understand you use it in a wider context within buildings too, right? It's not just BAS and stuff. Can you talk to, do you see the wider application of digitalization because you're involved in some of those other markets within the buildings?
Yeah, so networks are networks, they're a commodity. What digitization really means to me is what GE tried to do all those years ago that made a CEO get fired. And it's what companies like Carrier are going to do, where you take all of their brands and the brands become about the digital information. So I have to tell you, Anna, there ain't no difference whether you're connecting a camera, a smart car, a building, or whatever. So digitization to me is really a much broader thing than we're talking about on an HVAC by air handler level. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that was my suspicion too, that you're involved in a wider spectrum of applications than just the BAS stuff. And each one of those are going through a digitization process, right?
That's right. They all are. Look at traffic automation. They're addicted to Cisco, but Cisco only works when you're on the fiber there, and 50 or 60%, depending on what state you're in, that's got no fiber backbone run to it. So then it's a hard stop. They don't know how to connect it if they can't get on a Cisco framework. It's a hard stop. So we're able to come in and help bring those kinds of far-flung intersections and municipalities on board. So,
Bill, I suggest very strongly you look out the window where you're at and see if there's a couple black Suburbans that have just pulled up, just to be careful.
it was so funny. There was never you couldn't look out the window. All the windows were blacked out. It was kind of interesting working there. We flew in from Vegas every day. They had an airstrip up there. We'd fly in and fly home.
So I have a question for you, Bill. Here in Europe, a lot of the big four are actually out. I mean, for instance, here in the UK, only 75% of the market, even more of that, is with system integrators now. So the bigger control companies are kind of gone almost from doing projects. But one of the reports on one of the slides I did was actually saying from Frost & Sullivan that scouting is going to be something that's important on how do you get access to. There was $20 billion in put in startups that are in our industry last year. How are people going to actually bring those to market? Because it's a tough call for those guys in an industry that's traditionally very, very slow to adopt.
Yeah. Roger, I didn't catch all that. Could you make that a little bit more succinct for me?
Yeah, sure. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of startups that have been funded over the past couple of years. How is the industry that's typically slow going to bring those to market? How are we going to adopt all those newer technologies that these guys are actually creating?
Yeah, it's two things. First of all, the big companies are going to gobble them up and kill them because they don't want them. And then the small, but this digitization thing we're happening, which is decentralizing everything, is actually enabling companies even like ours, small company, to come in and make an impact. So the question is, can these startups, can they actually, to me, it's about the founders. Can they not go after that one small payoff and kill their brand? Can they sustain themselves over time? Because you guys and all of the channel and all around the globe, we're seeing once new companies. They want it, man. They really want it. So the question is, can you stay in business long enough to actually make a difference? And can you not get purchased by one of these big guys who don't want you? That might have sounded cynical, and I apologize for that.
So one last question for Bill, and then we'll wrap up.
I have one if I could. So Bill, you've seen kind of both sides, maybe more than some of us, in terms of IT versus the OT. In my past, it seems that one is always trailing or following or leading the other. What do you see as the most current sort of situation between IT versus OT when it comes to this topic.
I do see a lot of love happening between the two. They're starting to understand that they've got to get along. They're starting to understand that they've got to be separate but friendly. The other thing that we're seeing, Steve, we talk about this a lot. IT's not ready to actually connect your industry yet, but they're sitting back trying to figure out how. And if you do, if that happens, in my opinion, if we bring traditional IT into our industry, it's going to get slow. It's going to get complicate, raise costs, and slow the this technical revolution that we hope is right around the corner. So this managed services thing and IT networking and all that, Tracy, I got to say, man, let's figure out ways to do it so that the big boys don't come in and show us how to do it, which is going to complicate all of our lives.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you, Bill, Steve, John, and Mark for your perspective today, and everybody else for their questions and comments. So with that, let's wrap up this week. As always, the video will be up on YouTube later on tonight or tomorrow, and hope to see you next week on next week's Monday Live. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.